I'm Danette Haworth, and I'm here today with author Chris Tozier. He is the author of Olivia Brophie and the Pearl of Tagelus. Am I saying that right, Chris?
Yes, Tagelus, correct.
Tagelus, okay. And Chris, I just wanted to ask you a few questions about your book, because I heard you talk at the school, and I was really interested. So, first of all, how long have you been writing?
Oh, that's a really good question. When I was in elementary school, I have a very avid reader. My whole ambition when I was that age was to read the entire library. So I would go in, and I started at the upper left-hand corner of the library, and I would take a whole chunk of books home with me and devour them and go back and get the next chunk. And I made it through about a third of the library by the time I graduated.
Oh, gosh.
It never even occurred to me to be a writer when I was reading all that books. I just enjoyed reading so much. And it really wasn't until high school when I took a creative writing class for one semester, and it went very, very well. So I was very excited about that.
When you say it went very well, do you mean that like you had a good teacher response, or that you inside yourself felt?
I think it was both, and I think that happens to a lot of kids, right? When you have a very enthusiastic teacher about a subject that just jives with what your skill set,
right,
what your interests are, it really helps inspire you.
Yes.
And so I started writing as a senior in high school, and I have been writing ever since. Now, I went to college as a business major. And
not a writing major.
Not a writing major. But then after a semester of that, I ended up becoming an English and creative writing major, and that's what I graduated.
That's what you graduated?
Yes.
But what's your full-time job?
My full-time job is I'm an IT director at International Speedway Corporation, which you may know as the Daytona 500 and Talladega.
That's exciting.
So, yes,
yeah.
and it's a very different world from writing middle-grade fantasy novels.
Right, middle-grade fantasy novels, right. Which brings me to my next question. Since you are working in IT and all that stuff, how did you come to write this book that is? And you can see by the cover that this book takes place, like, it looks like it's in the jungles of Florida, a very nature-filled book, which is very different than your daytime job.
Yep.
And I've heard this story. It's a very unusual story. What was your inspiration for Olivia Brophie?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was actually inspired to write the book in two ways. I've always been writing poetry and short stories for adults and stuff like that. So this is really my first venture into kids' literature. And I was inspired with two things. One, I actually live in the Florida scrub, which is a rare ecosystem, and it's filled with all sorts of unusual animals. And it's very different than a normal forest. And it's very, the scientist in me is very interested and inspired by that. And the animals can be so weird there that they're kind of like fantasy animals already. They're real, but they're also really, really goofy.
The ones in the Florida scrub.
Yeah.
Okay, can you name one?
Yeah,
that's
sure.
Weird like that?
So there's an insect called the two-line walking stick, which is the biggest walking stick in America, and it actually, if you get too close to it, it will spray you and blind you temporarily.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just a weird weird insect that.
Yeah, that is weird.
I wrote an article once about there was a hurricane passing through. I don't know if you remember Hurricane Charlie back in 2004.
Yes, oh my gosh, yes, I remember that.
It's a very powerful, very small storm as hurricanes go. And I was out actually in my yard, and there were hundreds of these walking sticks in the palmettos. And as the storm approached, they all started beating they have these thin, long legs, and they all started beating the palmettos with their legs.
Oh
and there were hundreds of them in the forest, and you could hear all their little legs, because they have 6 legs, so they're all just going crazy. And there's this noise, and then the storm hit, and the rain hit all in one big swoop, and then of course I ran inside or whatever. But it's just one of the, there's just these very unusual, weird creatures out there.
That's so odd. I've never heard of such a thing. And it seems like a weird thing that I don't even know how
it's
to
like
say it.
It's like a social thing, right? It's like you're peering into a community that like you wouldn't even think.
They're all drumming, the storm's coming.
Like, why are they doing it? So I wrote an article about that, and there's actually walking sticks in the book. They're not doing that.
Right, they're not doing that.
So that was an inspiration. So I knew I wanted to write a kid's book about the scrub, and I struggled with that. I was like, what is the story? Really, what is the story I'm trying to get to? And then one night, and this often happens with, when you're thinking creatively. One night I had a dream, and one of those dreams that's very real to you, and in that dream, God, who was really just represented by gigantic hands, reached down to me and gave me this blue ball, which is actually looks just like that. And he told me that all the answers to the universe are in that ball.
All the answers to the universe are in that ball.
Yeah, so
that's something.
Now this felt very real to me, so I was really super excited, right?
Right.
In my dream.
Yeah.
And I spent the rest of my dream trying to get into the ball and like figure out, what are the answers to the universe, and I never could.
Right.
So, and I actually woke up that morning and started writing chapter 1.
Wow, just like that.
Now there's no God handing down,
right.
that particular dream isn't in the story, but just that experience, the idea of this pearl with the pearl in the book controls the laws of the universe. It's not really like, it doesn't necessarily tell you the answers of the universe.
Right.
But just that one little nugget like inspired me to.
It was the spark.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
Wow, I love that story. It's so interesting, and then what you did with it. And the last thing that I just wanted to ask you was, when you were, this story has a lot of stuff going in it. Like it's got, like you said, the Florida scrub, and real life things that. So with so much going on, fantasy and realism and all that. What was, when you were developing the story, what was the one thing that was really important for you to deliver to your readers?
Okay. So, as you know, I was inspired by The Scrub, and what's always amazed me is Florida is like the 4th most populated state in the country, and so few of our kids don't really they don't really get out in the woods a lot. And the Florida Scrub is amazing. Scientists from around the world come here to study those animals and study the ecosystem. It's the oldest ecosystem in Florida.
The Florida
Scrub. And, we get in our cars and we drive by these little scraps of woods that to us just, look like wastelands, but they're very, very special. And so I really because I live in the middle of it, I really feel the magic of that.
Yes.
I love fantasy books, obviously, and I looked around and I saw, all the fantasies were around vampires and elves and witches and fairies, which are all great, but they're also all old world mythologies. And it was, I've always really loved it when we could create mythologies that are like relevant to where we live.
Right.
Relevant to the new world, and that doesn't mean the old stories aren't relevant to us, because they have universal appeal.
Right, because the characters.
But fairies are born out of a local. Fairies come from regional. From regional lore themselves, and they mean more when you're in the wilds of Great Britain. Right.
Yes, I know what you mean.
And so it was really important to me to kind of create a magical world, a fantasy world that doesn't rely on old world mythology. It's starting to build like, hey, there's magic around us. So that's actually how I sign my books. I always sign the magic is all around you. And so it's really kind of a theme throughout the book that, that, hey, you don't have to get on a train and go to an old world school, boarding school to be in magic, right?
To have
and
this experience.
Again, we all love those books, but it's important that kids understand that wherever they live, there's something wherever they live that's magical, and you really have to, you have to look around you and like tap into that and find that. So that was really, those are the reasons I really wanted to write this book in this location.
Yes. Well, I think it sounds wonderful, and especially it's like what you said, like most fantasies are based in those old world countries and in sort of like those old world times and all that. But this is like a made in America type fantasy, you know what I mean? So
exactly.
I think it's wonderful, and the response that I've seen from the kids who come in here and talk to you, they just are taken away by it, and I see their eyes light up and stuff like that. So I think you're going to have really good luck with this book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks, Chris, and it was really nice talking to you. Chris Tozier, Olivia Brophie, and the Pearl of Tagelus.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Danette.
Okay.
Here.
And